Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
It didn't take long for the HOA to swoop in after my mother passed, almost like they'd been waiting for her last breath. I'd barely gotten through the funeral arrangements and the house was still filled with her things, with the memories, with all the energy that had made it ours. And here I was, mourning in what should have been peace. The house had been in our family for 3 decades, filled with love, meals around the dining table, and endless weekends of laughter. Now it was just me and my dog trying to navigate a pitiless HOA. The first letter showed up about 3 weeks after she passed. Of course, it was addressed to her, though they knew perfectly well she was gone. "Dear Mrs. Andrews," it read, "we've noticed that someone has moved into your property. Could you please provide information on your guest and his or her length of stay?" The letter was signed by Karen, the HOA president. Karen. Her name alone was enough to make me roll my eyes. My mother had mentioned Karen a few times over the years with that particular grimace. Karen loved to strut around, clipboard in hand, pointing out infractions. She was a little too invested in her position, like it was her personal mission to make everyone's life just a little bit harder. I shoved the letter in a drawer. It was ridiculous. They knew my mother had passed. And yet here was Karen demanding that the deceased verify her own daughter's presence in the house. I had no patience for this. But that was just the beginning. A week later, there was another letter. This time, it was something about noxious odors. Apparently, a couple of neighbors had complained about some smell. Now, I had spent the entire week scrubbing floors, airing out the house, and dealing with grief in between cleaning sprees. There was no smell, so I went down to the HOA office in person, ready to get to the bottom of it. "Oh, we can't quite recall who made the complaint," Karen said, in that thin, condescending tone she loved. She glanced down at her papers and shuffled them around a bit, not making eye contact. "Maybe the smell has dissipated by now," she added with a shrug. I stared at her, trying to bite my tongue. "Dissipated? That's the best you've got." "There was no smell, Karen. Are you just making things up at this point?" She pursed her lips, but didn't respond. I could tell she was annoyed that I dared to show up in person, that I wasn't just going to let her ridiculous complaints slide. She tapped her pen and finally said, "If you have any issues, just put them in writing. That's what we ask of all residents." I turned and left without another word. I knew a battle was brewing, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. But that wasn't enough for Karen. 2 days later, another letter showed up. This one was even more absurd. It was about my dog, Rufus. Now, Rufus was the most laid-back, sleepy dog you could imagine. He's a little fluffy mix, probably weighs 15 pounds soaking wet. I had mentioned to Karen, in passing, that I was considering training Rufus as a support animal because I have an autoimmune condition. I didn't even go into details. I just mentioned it, casually. Apparently, that had been enough to set her off. The letter read, "Due to your recent disclosure regarding a support animal, please provide documentation for a certified service animal. Failure to do so will result in a fine for unauthorized animals on the property." My blood was boiling. There was no unauthorized animal here. Rufus was fully within the HOA's parameters for pets, and there was nothing in the rules about requiring documentation for a dog who'd been living peacefully in his own home for years. The nerve of Karen, thinking she could bully me into jumping through her hoops. I marched back down to the HOA office. I was done with their letters and their fabricated issues. Karen was sitting behind the desk, looking smug as ever, like she'd been expecting me. "I got your letter," I said, holding it up. "What exactly do you need from me about Rufus?" "He's not a service animal. Not yet, anyway. Just a regular dog, and I don't owe you any paperwork for that." Karen sighed, the kind of exaggerated sigh people give when they're trying to make you feel small. "It's our responsibility to ensure all residents follow the community guidelines." "Guidelines? For what? For dogs that don't even bark?" I shot back. "And since when do you care about my autoimmune issues?" "I'd say it's hardly your business." She adjusted her glasses, avoiding my glare. "Well, once you indicated that he might be trained as a support animal, it became our business. We have to ensure everyone's comfort." "Oh, come on. Everyone's comfort? You mean your comfort? This is about control, Karen. That's all it's ever been." She smiled, that practiced little smirk. "If you have concerns, you're welcome to attend the next board meeting." "Oh, I'll be there," I replied, my voice low but firm. I left before she could get another word in. This was about more than just me now. It was about keeping my mother's home and not letting Karen think she could push me out with her petty nonsense. I decided then and there that I was going to change things. My mother's name was on that house, and I wasn't going to let Karen or her little band of self-important board members harass me out of it. I knew exactly what I had to do: introduce term limits for the board. That would take the power from Karen's hands and let the community breathe a little easier. But it wasn't as simple as just showing up and demanding change. No, Karen was deeply entrenched. She'd been president for ages, and everyone who tried to push back against her had eventually given up. I'd heard the stories from my mother about how Karen controlled everything, from landscaping decisions to fines for minor infractions, like a garbage can left out an hour too late. At the next board meeting, I arrived early. The room was almost empty except for a few of Karen's cronies, who gave me that same self-satisfied look she always wore. They'd probably been filling her head with stories, saying I was disruptive or a problematic new resident. I sat in the front row and crossed my arms, ready to hear whatever they had to say. When Karen finally walked in, she looked surprised to see me there. But she quickly composed herself, smiling that tight, patronizing smile she loved to give people. As the meeting went on, Karen droned on about all the issues in the community: bushes that were growing an inch too tall, paint that was a shade too bright, fences that weren't up to her exact specifications. Then, finally, it was time for open comments. I stood up, taking a deep breath. "Thank you," I said, "for giving me the chance to speak. I'd like to talk about introducing term limits for board members." Karen's face twitched slightly, but she quickly smoothed it over. "Term limits? I'm not sure that's necessary," she said, her voice dripping with forced politeness. "I think it is," I replied. "For too long, we've had the same people in charge, making decisions without any accountability. We need fresh perspectives. I'm proposing that board members should serve no more than 2 consecutive terms." There was a murmuring in the room. A couple of neighbors nodded, clearly interested in the idea. But Karen, she looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "While I appreciate your passion," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady, "the current board structure has served us well for years. Change for the sake of change isn't always beneficial." "Oh, I think it's more than beneficial," I countered. "It's necessary. People in power too long start to forget that they're supposed to serve the community, not rule over it." One of Karen's lackeys piped up, trying to back her up. "The board has done a wonderful job keeping property values up and maintaining community standards." "Really?" I shot back. "By sending harassment letters over non-existent smells? By asking a grieving family to prove their right to live in their own home? I'm not seeing the wonderful job here." Karen's face was flushed now. She was losing her cool, and I could tell she was close to snapping. "These guidelines are in place to protect everyone," she said through gritted teeth. "Then maybe they need to be updated," I replied calmly. "Maybe it's time we rethink what protection means. Maybe it's time for some real changes around here." I glanced around, noticing more heads nodding. People were with me. Karen had pushed too many of us for too long. She was realizing, perhaps too late, that her iron grip was slipping. "Well, if you want to make this an official proposal, it will require a vote from the entire community," Karen stammered, clutching her clipboard as if it could shield her from the wave of dissatisfaction growing in the room. "Then let's do it," I said, feeling a surge of confidence. "Let's put it to a vote. Term limits, for the sake of the community." Karen was visibly shaken, but she managed to compose herself, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, "Fine. We'll put it to a vote." I left that meeting feeling like I'd won a small victory. It was just the beginning, but I could tell that Karen had finally met her match. The vote would be held soon, and I was determined to rally enough support to pass it. As I walked back to my mother's house, I felt a sense of resolve. This was my home now, and I wasn't going to let Karen and her minions push me around. They could send all the letters they wanted, make all the snide comments they could muster. But I wasn't backing down. You do not. There is no regulatory body for service or support animals currently regulated under HOA law. Not saying that this is a good thing, just that it is a thing. You could go and make up paperwork and it would have all the same backing of any paperwork they would want under the law. No regulation, no laws, no requirements. Kinda crazy. In HOAs, service animals are covered by the FHA, not HOA. HOA.The is about publicly accessible services and locations, but otherwise you were right. There are laws and requirements, just no paperwork. It's an access issue. Training and certification costs tens of thousands of dollars and many people self-train. If you forced certification, it would mean that a disabled person may not be able to afford to get the help they need. You're both right and wrong. While there's no official paperwork for service animals, the Fair Housing Act does protect them in HOAs. It's a bit of a gray area, though. The HOA can ask for some proof of disability and need for the animal, but they can't demand specific certifications. It's more about the animal's function than fancy papers. Self-trained service animals are totally legit, which is great for folks who can't afford expensive training programs. The key is that the animal performs tasks related to the disability. HOAs often overstep, thinking they have more power than they do. It's a tricky balance between community rules and individual rights.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.